Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Susan Eastland, and I'm on the adult programming team at Cary Library. And tonight we're going to be discussing how to build resilience in the age of burnout, which is going to be presented to us by Alison Campbell. She is the founder of her company unBurnt. Alison Campbell is a high energy and visionary leader who made her mark across industries over the past 20 years. After a lifetime hustling and 3 years into working and traveling during the pandemic, an emergency visit and ultimately surgery caused her to question everything, given the debilitating effects of burnout. Allison's journey led her to pursue a new path, and in 2024 became a certified health and wellness coach. Now, as the founder and CEO of unBurnt, she's on a mission to destigmatize burnout and provide recovery coaching to individuals and prevention solutions to businesses. Alison also provides free resources, including webinars like tonight, workshops, and downloadable guides to help manage chronic stress. So I'm going to hand it off to Alison in a second. If anyone has any technology problems or any questions about anything that Alison mentions, please just submit them to the chat or the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on it. If it's pertinent to what she's talking about, I'll pop my head up and let her know. Otherwise, we're going to get to them at the end. But for now, welcome, Alison, and thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I am going to start sharing my screen. So just give me the go ahead once you see it up. Okay. And so while folks are filtering in, we just got the screen up. Let's just all take a moment here to land. Let's take a breath and give ourselves the space to, whoops, excuse me, getting back into presenter mode. Susan, can you see that presenter mode?
Yes, all
Excellent.
good.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's give ourselves the space to land, take a breath. I think we might still have some folks filtering in. Just thanking ourselves. I really appreciate you spending an hour tonight on this January Wednesday. It's cold, it's dark, and so let's just take a couple of deep breaths as we all land and get settled in. I'm gonna move my presenter screen. Okay. So again, thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so excited to be sharing everything that I've been learning and building. And again, really appreciate your time on this January night. So building resilience in the age of burnout, you got a quick overview of my backstory, who I am. I spent almost 20 years in a corporate capacity. And so I thought, rather than doing a resume readout and going deeper into my background, I'll share a bit more about unBurnt at the end of this presentation. But I thought I'd just give you a couple of really quick fun facts about who I am as a person, outside of just who I am as the previous corporate leader and now founder. So my name is Alison Campbell. I'm the founder of unBurnt, but well before that, I was born and raised in New York. So born on Long Island, come from a very, very large, loving Italian family. My grandmother came to New York when she was 12 years old. She came from Bari, Italy. And so that's a huge part of my identity and just the pride in her courageous journey here as a little girl coming to New York, learning a new language, being given a new name. So just a ton of pride. And, I think not dissimilar to so many of us, I was raised to believe I could be anything, I could do it all. I have this picture here of the New York Stock Exchange because for so many years of my life, I thought I was going to be a stockbroker. I wanted to work on Wall Street. And so, we grow up and we go to college, we get our degree, we check the boxes. I did work at Morgan Stanley as an analyst, and spoiler, it wasn't great. It wasn't for me. It also wasn't that fun. And so, I share some of these little glimpses of who I am as a person because I think it's really important that we continue as a society when we say hi and welcome ourselves. We talk about more than just the career checklist and the resume readout. Super proud to be here today and thought I'd just share a little bit. So from a burnout perspective and sort of where we are and where do we go from here, tonight we're going to talk a bit about the state of burnout, I'm going to spend about 20, 25 minutes. Please do jump into the chat if you have questions. I want this to be, real-time informative. But we'll spend about 25 minutes going through the state of burnout, what's at stake. So impact of chronic stress, some quick hit stats on some costs associated with chronic stress, overwhelm, burnout in our society. And then we'll spend the second half talking about micro habits. So some tactics. I have some exercises, so we'll break a couple of times so that you can work through some of the exercises and actually incorporate these, hopefully, into your practices after tonight. So the age of burnout. I think burnout is not new. This is not a new term. It's not a brand new phenomenon, but I think all of us are pretty well aware that it's intensified significantly in the years since the pandemic. It's hard to believe it's been almost 5 years since those early days of lockdown in March 2020. But we're experiencing this phenomenon, this crisis of collective exhaustion post 2019, early 2020. The world ceased to exist as we knew it before. The way we work, the way we travel, live, how our kids went to school, all of it completely changed overnight. And no human on this planet was immune from that sort of collective trauma that we went through globally as a society. And I think that for better or for worse, as human beings, we are resilient, and we sort of needed to figure out very quickly, okay, so where do we go from here? And how do we persevere? How do we work? How do we send our kids to school? But in doing so, I think we've had some knock-on effects that have continued that we're still working through. And so just a quick at a glance look back at burnout, and the term itself it was coined in 1974. And so the term burnout was coined by an American psychologist. It showed up for the first time in the Journal of Social Issues. It was cited in a publication called Staff Burnout. And Freudenberger, in his journal, his publication, said it's becoming exhausted by making excessive demands on energy, strength, and resources in the workplace. And it was almost just kind of thrown in, like he talked about burnout, but it really caught fire, and it became a term that indicated extreme stress, excessive pressure associated with the demands at work. It wasn't until 2019, so right before the pandemic, that it was actually recognized in the International Classification of Diseases by the World Health Organization. And so while it is now recognized as an occupational phenomenon, and the WHO emphasizes that it's specific to the workplace and to the workplace context, but it's not classified as a medical condition. So it's a little gray, it's a little amorphous in terms of, there's no official diagnosis to say, I have burnout in the same way other diseases are very clearly articulated from a medical diagnosis standpoint. 2020, I just talked about the pandemic, lockdown, overnight upheaval, our rhythms, our ways of working, living, everything changed overnight. It created a lot of stress and pressure, not only on ways of working, but on many, many systems, many of the safety nets that we had as a society. So it became very multidimensional, all of this stress, and how, again, everything changed overnight, not to mention how overwhelmed we were as a society, just fearful of this public health crisis. In 2021, we experienced something called the Great Resignation, and you may remember people moving around a lot, leaving their jobs, leaving their corporate roles, thinking there's got to be something else. I'm questioning everything now that we've been through this pandemic. Women at a more pronounced rate leaving the workforce altogether. They just, cited because the demands of maintaining very high stress, high pressure roles, often trying to figure out flexibility if offices were now reopening with the demands at home and still homeschooling children, it became very cumbersome. And we've seen a lot of the dynamics within the workplace. There's sort of a new HR term denoting quiet quitting, and there's like sort of a new term every 6 months, because there's just been so much shifting within the workplace as we've navigated lockdown, the pandemic, and now these post-pandemic years. One couple of stats in 2024, so just a few months ago, Headspace actually produced a workplace study, nationally representative, and 77% of US respondents said that workplace stress has poorly impacted their physical health. And then another 44% indicated that it led to serious mental health challenges. So, I mean, these are just staggering numbers. It's pretty all encompassing. And so when we think about burnout, again, it can be a bit amorphous. Like, do I have burnout? How do I define it? According to the research, it's defined by three categorical indicators. And so the first is what I think most of us associate burnout with. It's a feeling of exhaustion. It's the fatigue, it's the overwhelm, and it's beyond just I had a few really busy days at work, and I'm feeling really tired on a Friday. It's often this state of chronic exhaustion where even after a good night's rest, even after maybe a day off, you're still feeling totally depleted, and it's really hard to reset. The second one is feelings of negativity. And so typically cynicism towards your job, maybe perhaps ways of working, you're starting to really want to distance yourself because you're feeling like, no matter what I do, it's really hard to impact change. The way we're working, these meetings, these goals, none of it makes sense. And so so that negativity cycle starts to come in. And then the third indication, for me, this was very true, and so often is one of the markers. And it's to me very sad that we start to question our own abilities because we're in the state of chronic doing, chronic exhaustion. Some of our cognitive abilities are impacted. You start to have those negative feelings. And then we start to question, am I even good at my job? Should I be in this role? Can I make it in the workplace? Like maybe it's just easier for me to take that step back. And so we start to question our own abilities, which is a key sign, a key marker of burnout as well. So let's talk through some of what's going on, some of the drivers. I mean, there are many more categories. I'm going to talk about three tonight. The first one, you might have that stress, that overwhelm creeping up, even just seeing this list. I mean, the first main category is our always on technology and expectations to instantly be responding, threads, messages, inbound. It's instant access, but it's also instant inbound all the time from so many channels. We are receiving more information than ever before. And it's really hard to keep up. And so I know I can't see everybody's faces, but I'm going to just do a couple of quick questions for you to consider. And if you're watching this back, take a moment to consider. The first one, have you ever been texting with a friend and you realize that you're having one conversation in messages? Perhaps you're DMing with a group in Instagram, you have another group me or WhatsApp open. I mean, we're just the same people, maybe even having very similar conversations, but we're messaging in all these different channels. Wild, no judgment. I'm doing it. This is the society that we're living in. Another reflection for me, becoming aware of just how we use our devices and how we're sort of always on, watching TV at night. How many people are watching TV or trying to unwind? They have their phone on one leg, maybe an iPad on the other leg. We're not giving ourselves that space. Again, no judgment, no judgment. That was me for a very long time. We're not giving ourselves that space to rest and reset. And so, as a result, our brains aren't really wired for this information overload all the time. We're training our brains to be checking, to be expecting, to be looking. And, we're actually manufacturing to-dos in a lot of ways, because if we're not busy, if we didn't get a ding or a notification, we think, oh, let me pick it up and check it. Maybe I missed something. And so it's this fear of missing out and this fear of, because I'm not busy, I must be missing something that, leads to this state of overdrive. The second main category that we'll talk about tonight is our 21st century ways of working. And so lots and lots of dynamics, lots to unpack. We, can't possibly get into all of it tonight. But, as a culture, we have really come to glorify hustle. hustle culture, the rise and grind, the badge of honor for being exhausted and working 12-hour days, and who can respond fastest to the email or to Slack. It's great to be able to have ambition and want to work hard and in short bursts, have projects or periods of time where everyone's really buckling down and getting it done. We just can't do that and sustain that pace and that intensity forever. And yet our society has really lifted this up as, the pinnacle. If you're not hustling, if you're not working 24/7, have you even made it? And so, that's a dynamic that we really feel inside so many organizations. And we get these messages on social media and at large that, we need to hustle. Post-pandemic, a lot of these next bullets are very interconnected, figuring out hybrid remote. Are we back in the office? How are we working? How are we using in-person time? We've become really meeting heavy and reliant on, Zoom. We're having this conversation tonight, and I'm so thankful you're here. Oftentimes we're in back-to-back meetings. That's in and of itself draining, but it's also creating this dynamic where it's hard to get the work done. It's hard to context switch from meeting to different topic to different group, and then have all of these to-dos pile up all day long. Folks find themselves, well, I have to get the work done at night after the kids go to bed. There's some dynamics at work, months of research and conversation and discovery and, talking to leaders inside organizations. Oftentimes, if there's a lack of clarity around goals and effective work streams, things just break down. And it's not malicious, but folks feel like they're spinning. They feel like they're sitting on all these meetings and the work's not getting done, and they're frustrated. They don't understand how the work ladders up into the big, broader company goals. And then the less dynamic, the reality of so many families being dual income and balancing the very real pressures of work, and then getting in your car and picking up the kids, making dinner, having all of the plates spinning. It's a lot. It's a lot to carry. And it oftentimes feels like there's just not a moment to pause and to reset. And it feels hard because it is. And the last one, just a kind of key driver I wanted to touch on, is the loneliness epidemic. So, this is very intricately tied to burnout. And so first we'll start with loneliness. It's an emotional state that arises from feeling isolated. It's very multidimensional. It's sadness, it's grief, it's isolation, it's feeling like you could be surrounded by people and still feel very lonely. It can feel like I don't have an outlet, people really to connect with and talk to. We know the research has become more clear in recent years that it actually leads to premature death. And so the Surgeon General issued an advisory in May of 2023 that it leads to an increase of potentially up to 29%. This loneliness epidemic, it's really plaguing our society. Harvard did a study last year indicating that 21% of respondents, US adults, indicated that they're very lonely. And the reason why I say this is tied in with burnout is because burnout can also be an experience that's very isolating. You often feel like, despite so many people, we talked about, 77% of people saying it's impacting their physical health. It also feels like inside your workplace, perhaps you don't want to raise your hand and say, I'm overwhelmed, or there's not really a culture to speak up and rebalance the work. Like it just doesn't feel safe to say, I'm feeling like I may be approaching burnout or already there. And so as a result, when you're going through burnout, research, my personal, my conversations, my personal experience, it can feel very lonely and isolating. And so when we sort of unpack that and think about what's at stake, the such broad impact, these drivers that are very present in our society, they're very real. We have to stop and sort of think about, like, what is the impact on our minds, our bodies? We're feeling it. Stress, and I think most of us have probably heard this. When we're in a state of chronic stress, we are experiencing fight or flight. Stress is okay in short doses, in short periods. It's necessary. As from an evolution standpoint, necessary to keep us alive. It kind of readies ourselves to take action, to either get out of a dangerous situation or fight back. But we're not meant to stay stuck in that stress cycle. And so when we're stuck in chronic stress, it has a very significant and real impact on almost every system in our body. And so this is a very quick rundown, from mental and emotional health to heart health. The American Heart Association cites the very real impacts on, cardiac episodes, stroke, type 2 diabetes associated, correlated with workplace stress and chronic overwhelm, cortisol, stress kind of flowing through our bodies as a result of workplace pressures and stress. We can have impact from cortisol levels that they get emitted in our bloodstream and our circulatory system. They actually end up deposited in our gut. And so when you think about having that stomach ache, that persistent, gut feeling, that's very real. The cortisol is landing, the stress signals and distress signals are landing there, and it can have an impact on our gut health, our digestion. And then as a result of all of that, we're feeling tired, we're having potentially, negative thoughts. We are very much less inclined to want to get up and go for a run or take that walk or do physical activity that's going to help us feel better and actually move through that stress cycle. So when we think about it, it's really, unfortunately, can be a very dangerous flywheel of, getting stuck in that stress cycle and not being able to rest because our brain is on overdrive, and yet we're not doing the physical activity or just the break activity that we need to reset. And so how does it show up? I touched on a couple of them. We feel mentally fatigued. It's not just, I'm tired, I'm going to go get a good night's sleep. This is just complete depletion. It, affects our moods. We can be really irritable and cranky, and, oftentimes with the people we love most, because we come home and we're maxed out. We have sort of nothing left to give. Impacts our cognitive thinking, our memory, our sleep is disturbed. We need rest more than ever, but we can't turn it off. And so we have these racing thoughts. Our physiological response is impacting our ability for us to actually just, slow and rest and actually get into that deep sleep that we so desperately need. Things like persistent headaches, abdominal pain. This is what's tricky, is that these symptoms, these signs and symptoms, can first be caused by so many other things. And often when we're tired and we're overwhelmed and we feel like I can't stop, I can't really address, I'm just going to push through. These are things that are really easy to ignore. I mean, I did for months and months. These are things that you think, I'll feel better after my next board meeting. I'll take that vacation and I'll reset. And then we don't take those days off, or we're sitting on vacation with our family, still checking our phones. And so as a result, again, we're stuck in that chronic stress cycle. And there's very real costs. And so I'll just wrap up with this slide before we move into the exercises and some tactics, and then some practices that you can take with you. Workplace stress, when we sort of add all of the line items up, it's impacting us in a very real way. And so from a workplace cost perspective, it's estimated that it's about $300 billion in annual price tag to employers. When you think about the additional healthcare costs, when you think about engagement, productivity that can be quantified, retention, so burned out employees are 2.6 times more likely to be job seeking. So they're both not engaged. And then we have the cost of turnover when that employee leaves the organization. Burnout can lead to an increase of safety incidents, absenteeism. So there's so many factors that get quantified, and $300 billion is a very large, feels like a very cartoon number, but there are things that we can do to address the drivers and then ultimately these outcomes to lessen the burden and lessen these costs. So we're going to get into tactics and micro habits and some exercises. Let me just pause for one quick second to see, do we have any questions, or should I keep moving? No questions. Okay, we're going to keep moving. I'm very excited to talk about this. I'm also going to let my dog out because he, I think, hears other people. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to open the door And here we go. Okay, very real life. And so this last section, I'm really excited to spend some time walking through, what do we do with individuals? How do we not get stuck? There's so much that we need to think about and action on and sort of talk about real solutions inside the workplace. But as individuals, what can we do? So going to kind of walk through some tactics and then some exercises, things that hopefully you can take with you. So the first thing, this before we kind of go deeper, these are some high level but very actionable, very quick hit things that from a daily micro habit standpoint, any of us can do. All of these things are things that hopefully from a time perspective we can layer in. And so the first one is walking meetings. And this might seem silly in Massachusetts in January. It's very cold, but this is something I started doing several years ago, starting to think about from a team perspective, if I was having a check-in, if it was a career development conversation, we didn't need our screens, we weren't going to be in Excel spreadsheets, could we pepper in maybe once a month walking meetings? And I mean, it does a lot of really great things. It gets you up and moving, it gets you away from your screen. If you're talking about something that, maybe it's like you're on the go, you can get that energy flowing, but sometimes it might be tricky for whether you're the direct report or you have a team member. It kind of, you're both moving in that same direction together, but you're able to have some of these more development conversations on the go. And so I offer that because it's something that, I talk about when I'm mentoring or coaching, and it seems to be something that's doable and that really sticks. And again, it checks a lot of those boxes from a movement and screen break perspective. And it also is something that's actionable that you can do during your workday. The next thing is a breathing exercise, and there are so many. I have a few on my website. I try to incorporate various breathing activities in my newsletter and constantly researching myself. But your breath is something that's always with you. This is something that, for me personally, it's become a practice. It's become something that I catch, that if I start to feel stress and overwhelm really ratchet up and really start to creep up, I try to catch the thought and I think about, why am I stressed? But I bring it back to the present moment. And there's a few different tactics. There's box breathing, there's breathing through your nose, sealing your lips, and then breathing out. But let's just take a moment here and try some box breathing. Again, I know I can't see everyone, but if you can take a moment, box breathing is in intervals of either 4 or 7 seconds, where you're going to breathe in, hold it at the top, breathe out, and then pause again. And you can do that in cycles of 4 or 7 seconds. It really helps to slow your entire nervous system down, and it helps to enable you to come back to that present moment. So I encourage, as I'm kind of talking through the next couple of tactics here, just give it a try. It really does calm your mind and bring you back to the present. It signals to your body that you're safe, and it's something you can do anywhere. I would do it leaving meetings. Now I sort of ready myself if I'm going from one activity to the next. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, like, oh, I'm off to do the next thing, I just do a quick 2-minute breathing exercise, and it really does help. The next thing on this slide is an end of day checklist. And so I think so often what starts to really contribute to the feeling of just always on pressure, there's always that next thing to do, is the cognitive load and the mental checklist that we carry in our brains. And when we're rushing from meeting to pick up to next activity to making dinner to, oh my gosh, I forgot to get back to somebody personally, like we're balancing so much in our brains all the time, that when I started to realize I'm a planner, I have my checklist, I have my to-do lists, but let me widen that to incorporate sort of a holistic whole life view. And so at the end of every day, I take out my to-do list from a work perspective. I look at things that are coming up with the kids, my partner and I, we can sort of look at our joint calendar. But for me, an end of day ritual, and so I offer this as another tactic, is just taking that 15 minutes to get clear on what did I do today, what happened today, what needs to get carried over that, perhaps I didn't get to? What adjustments do I need to make in my calendar? And it enables you to get it out of your brain down on paper in a way that it feels actionable. It gives you closure for the day. And so that doesn't mean that you're done thinking about work and you may want to do a little bit more later on. But again, it gives you that finality of I'm going to check in with myself, get it all down on paper, and give myself the space to transition from work to early evening in a way that feels a little bit more, structured and organized. And so this next slide, before we go into the exercises, which I'm going to provide, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I forgot to, I'm going to provide these worksheets to you to work on some of these exercises, after tonight's session. This is really I need to put my oxygen on, the oxygen mask on first before I can help other slides. It's about really understanding the big categorical buckets of overall wellness that need to be filled for you to feel well. And so, the first thing I'll say is that it takes practice to filter through and really understand what works for you. I can tell you a couple of things that I do, and those might not be relevant. They may not relate. They may be things you've tried before that don't actually help you, or now you feel overwhelmed because it's one more thing you think you should be doing. This is a very personal exercise. From a coaching perspective, I help people. We do this wellness audit. We go through the categories and really understand what are the goals, but let's sit down and really assess perhaps where the deficits are. And this, when you're looking at this slide and you think, oh my goodness, there are all these categories, how am I going to fill it? It's not about having a checklist to now keep up with more things to do. This is another checkpoint. This is a place to say, holistically, where do I want to maybe spend some time investing in more consistent movement or organization planning, my checklist, sleep hygiene. I'm going to offer you a few suggestions of things that I do, but this is not meant to be, again, a very comprehensive, exhaustive thing to keep up with. This is a tactic that you can use on a weekly or monthly basis just to check in and kind of check in on across these different dimensions. How am I doing? I set a movement goal. You know what? I fell a little short. That's okay. This next month, I'm going to reset and recommit. But it's about taking out this list. And for me, I'll be vulnerable and share a little story. A year ago, when I had surgery, I had been a runner my whole life. And after I had surgery, it was really hard to even walk a mile again. And so I had to build up. And so if I'm taking this sheet out every month, I'm probably going to keep circling movement. I'm going to keep going back to I've got to get my runs in, even if it's just half a mile more, and kind of work its way up. Other people might say, from a mindset perspective, I want to recommit to meditation. I want to try to see if I can go from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 minutes. And that's a really important pillar that I know helps me, and I want to recommit to getting it done. So again, this is meant to be just an actionable, a check-in, a pulse check on, let me first filter through and understand, for me, what do I need to feel whole, to feel good, to feel well? And if things start to get out of balance, that's okay. Let me just check in and see how I can recommit to some of those practices. So I'm going to keep moving here. Any questions before I move to the next exercise?
Allison, we did have a question on the last slide.
Oh, sure.
Someone just asked, what does the organization refer to?
Yes, great question. So the organization, and thank you for calling that out, and thank you for bearing with me as my dog was scratching the door to get in and crying. If you heard that, I apologize. The organization bucket is around planning. It's around those tactics. So if we go back a slide, it's about this end of day checklist. It's about sort of putting the systems and structures in place, not to handcuff you, not to feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to be like super on top of my checklist. It's really more of the permission to be able to say, all right, let me take an audit and assess how today went or how this week went, and then make a new plan going forward. So the next two exercises are actually in that um, organizational bucket. So I hope that helped and that you'll get more clarity as we walk through the next two exercises. Um, so for this weekly stressor scan, this can be weekly, this can be monthly, as you're doing a little bit more of a broader zoom out. This can be as needed. So one thing I found as I was sort of experiencing burnout and became more aware, and then left the corporate world, really starting to unpack the drivers, the why, the like, not just what is the stressor, but why is it worrying me? What am I nervous about? And why is this bothering me? So something that's really, really worked, and now I incorporate it as part of a practice within my coaching side of the business, is this stressor scan. And again, this can be a tool. It's a bit more blown out than these three questions, but this can be a tool that you take with you. And if you catch that feeling of stress and overwhelm, there's just a couple of questions you can sit down for 15 minutes and name them. So the first question, so we're going to take a few minutes, but the first question is, what's bothering me? Can I name and write down the 2 to 3 things? So whether it's an actual deliverable deadline? Is it something I'm worried about with my kids? Whatever it is, name it, write it down, and then take a few moments for each stressor to think about why. Why is this bothering me? What's the root? Is it I am really worried that I have so much time pressure and I want it to go really well? Like trying to answer that next question around what about it is leading to that overwhelm. The next question is, what am I going to do about it? What action can I take? And so you look at the stressors, you can maybe do one at a time. What am I going to do next? And then if it's out of my control, if 1, 2, 3, if they're all sort of out of my control, naming that and saying, okay, I can't control the outcome. How can I let this go? And this is very much a practice as a recovering perfectionist, as someone. Control is a very tough nut to crack, as somebody who always wanted to have everything buttoned up. Letting go can be very hard, but that's why it's part of this practice, because when we're spending an outsized amount of energy on things we can't control or outcomes that we really can't drive, we're sort of wasting very precious energy and time. So we're going to take a few minutes. Again, I apologize, I can't see you. So I'm just going to give you about 2 minutes on a piece of paper, on a post-it somewhere, to run through this exercise, jot down some of your stressors, and we'll come back together briefly. Okay, so we're going to come back. We have a couple more slides. Hopefully, this was helpful to just jot down, get some thoughts on paper. It's something you can revisit as often as you need to. I recommend maybe one time a week, every other week, but sort of putting this in your practice to really start to name the feeling, name what's coming up when you're feeling super pressured, overwhelmed. You can do it anytime. It doesn't need to be, I do this every Sunday, but this can be a tool that you take with you to really be able to get underneath those root drivers and then figure out what your action plan is. Can I either do something or let it go? The next exercise, this is something I recommend that you sort of routinely bake in, whether it's a weekly Friday, a Sunday, a Monday, but some regular cadence that's part of your rhythm to again help you reassess, reframe. Our modern world, things are moving, coming at us so quickly, things change, if not daily, multiple times a day. And so our to-do list is never static. And so just like my end of day ritual of, all right, I want to be super present. Let me get it out of my brain. Let me write it down. What did I do? What do I need to do on Friday? I really have come to value being able to close out my week with a sense of clarity as well. And so I calendar out 30 minutes on a Friday afternoon. I really look at, okay, how did my week go? What did I accomplish? I go back to, a master to-do list. Over the course of a week, I'll be honest, I start having to-do lists on post-its. I'm emailing myself notes. So I use that time to get it really organized and pulled back together. But I think clearly about what are my top priorities for next week? Because often we get ourselves in a cycle, no judgment. It's just so busy and it's can become day over day, just trying to do and get through. We lose sight of the bigger picture. And so both professionally and personally, sometimes if we have personal ambitions, goals, hobbies, seeing friends, making time for ourselves, we sort of lose sight of um, the bigger picture, and we need to zoom out to be able to get that focus. So I really recommend that you take a look at what do I need to do and what are the actions, what are the things on my calendar that are going to lead to me making progress on those bigger goals. Because when we're making progress, we feel more fulfilled, we feel like we're aligned with our purpose professionally, personally, and we feel like we're driving in a direction that we're excited about versus just the doing and the churning. So that's the next question to answer. And then always something that I try to incorporate, and it helps from even a family planning perspective. What is one fun thing I'm going to do, or that as a family we're going to do? And what is one thing that we're going to do as a family, or I'm going to do personally for rest? Because so often on the weekends, we are just catching up from a very busy week. We're trying to get as much done as humanly possible. We're balancing activities. We're trying to check in and see friends. And we forget to rest. And it's really, really important that that becomes part of our program as well. So we're going to pause for another 2 minutes here. This is our last exercise before a final wrap up. So let's take just a couple of minutes and think about. I know it's Wednesday, not Friday, but let's flow through. What did I accomplish over the last 7 days? What are my top three priorities for the rest of this week and next week? And then one fun thing, and what am I going to do for rest? So I'll give you guys a few minutes to walk through those questions. Okay, so we're going to start to come back. I hope that was helpful to get some thoughts jotted down. And again, this is something you can take with you. So this exercise, the weekly stressor scan, the self audit, these are going to be worksheets that I provide and will be emailed out with a link to this recording. And it'll be a PDF form so you can print it out. And again, hopefully these are practices that you can start to incorporate to help reduce the mental load and just layer in some things from a micro habit perspective that will help, move through the stress cycle, in addition to sort of understanding what other practices you need to incorporate. So just a few final thoughts, some other anti-burnout antidotes. I think, we've the research is clear. We hear about this, and sometimes we know, and yet we forget. So I just wanted to kind of round up some final thoughts here around things we can do to really help us get out of that stress cycle and feel more well on an ongoing basis. The first, connection. It's just we are, as human beings, we're meant to be connected. We're not meant to do this alone. I think oftentimes we think we have to carry the load. And so there's a whole component of work and I've got this and I can do it. We as a species, we're meant to share the load, but building relationships and then checking in and prioritizing time for leisure and the relationships we have outside of work is just so important. Volunteering, there was recently a lot of new research. It's, from a service perspective, it's of course great for the receiver, but when we're giving of ourselves, it's also really wonderful. There's so many benefits for the person who's volunteering, that the giver. And so, finding time to incorporate, whether it's a day of service, perhaps your workplace offers this. It's a day that you get, something that you can just consider. Can I prioritize this into my routine? Meditation is one that's very hard for me, I'll share, but it has enormous benefits, really helping all of the systems I mentioned on that slide, all of the things that get impacted by that chronic stress cycle, cortisol, adrenaline. It really helps bring us back to the present, calm our nervous system down. And it's a practice like all of these other things. I personally can't really quiet my mind for more than 5 or so minutes, but it's something I'm working on. And is something that you can perhaps find works for you and put in your toolbox. Quarterly goals, so just from, again, that organization, that planning perspective, that feeling like it's out of my brain and it's sort of living somewhere, something I can tie back to and refer to. If we zoom out even further and we're not just thinking daily and weekly, it's important to think about professionally. We spend a lot of time setting goals as a company, working with our teams on what are we going to accomplish? How are we going to get there? It's really important holistically to do that same exercise as a person, to feel like I understand my professional goals and my ambitions, even outside of what we're trying to achieve this quarter as a company. And I also understand personally what my other ambitions are and things I want to be doing for pleasure, hobbies, with my family. And building that quarterly picture, I think, again, gives us that sense of purpose and gives us things outside of perhaps what can sometimes be periods of I don't want to say burnout, periods of stress and overwhelm, but those are the reset elements that help us balance. But it, again, important to really prioritize that holistic picture. And then the last one I threw in, I think the irony is not lost on me that this is a virtual, we're on devices session, but prioritizing screen-free breaks is just really important. Figuring out how you can step away from that screen. Sometimes I still have the tendency to want to push through and I'm starting to get tired, but okay, let me just do that one more thing. When I do step away and I really try to force myself, I always feel just a little bit fresher. And so it's some of the unlearning and breaking of habits, but if we can try to carve out time where we know at 12 o'clock, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to walk around, if I'm remote, the house, if I'm at the office, can I move around and not just from meeting room to the next meeting room, really trying to make sure we're giving our brains that break from the constant connection to devices. So those are the wrap up antidotes. Just wanted to leave everybody with a slide on unBurnt. Thrilled to be here. I'm so excited and passionate to be sharing what I'm learning and continuing to learn, build. And so if you're interested, if anything was, you're curious to learn more, check us out at getunburnt.com, and just want to thank you all for your time and being here. So I think I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. So if we have any in the chat or you have questions that you want to pop in now, I'd love to answer some.
Yes, so we do have some questions. I just first wanted to say thank you so much for all that information. Specifically for me, the Friday reset is really hitting. I definitely have like very busy weeks that bleed into very busy weekends, and I think time just flows on and I get like overwhelmed at just I'm bad at kind of taking a pause and both reflecting and kind of small goal setting. So I very much appreciate the what did I accomplish and then also setting a fun and a restful goal. So I'm going to be taking that Friday reset. I appreciate that prompt.
Amazing.
Um, and then we have a really great question that someone sent in. I relate a lot to this from past jobs that I've worked at. It's a little bit long-winded, but I think everything here is important, so I'm going to say it all.
Okay.
Sometimes when you sense you are burned out, perhaps you've been burned out for a while, the worry is what will happen if you decide to leave, resign, or move on from your current position. Who will fill the space? How will the organization do? Do you need to just worry about yourself and trust that all will be well? How does someone who has been so involved in an organization for nearly a decade put the future of that organization aside and do what is right for them? Perhaps if someone is burned out, it's actually going to be better for the organization overall for that person to step aside and let someone else with new energy and a new skill set take over. Do you have any advice or thoughts?
Great question. So thank you for whoever answered that. I mean, there's a lot there, but super powerful. And I think a thread that's very common when I'm meeting with, talking to, coaching other people is this feeling of, I've invested so much time. I'm so intimately involved in all of the workflows, the team. I care about the mission. I care about the people. Personally, for me, it was a grieving process. When I left my last corporate role, I, I made the decision, and yet it was really difficult. So I just want to first acknowledge that it is very complicated, very hard, and there is no one answer and there's no right answer. With that said, I'll just offer a few thoughts that came to mind. I think the first thing is trying as much as possible to go through an exercise of distinguishing between self and the company and the organization. And while we care, we're ambitious, we want to put our very best foot forward, we want to build our careers. It's taken me a long time, but our identity is not our career. It's a part of, but it's not the central everything. And so if we can start to first try to tease out this feeling of I owe it to this organization, what's going to happen, separate that out as much as we can from first and foremost, what do I need? How am I feeling? How am I operating and showing up? I do care about the organization, but am I giving my best version of person, whatever your role is at this organization at this time for the people that I want to show up for. So if you can start to do that exercise, what do I need? What do they need? I think one alternative before you consider is it just time to go? Am I going to quit? Am I going to walk away? There could be a path, I don't know how big the organization is, where you explore a different role. And is there an opportunity to shift into a new team, a different function? Is there an opportunity to help create a job that maybe doesn't exist, but you see a need? And it's an opportunity to sort of breathe fresh energy, not only into, hey, I see this gap or I see this thing, I've been here 10 years. Maybe I'm personally, I'm feeling frustrated because there are things that are happening that feel like maybe they're fixable. So sometimes we do think about binary, do I stay or do I go? So I'd maybe after that exercise of separating self and company, think through, is there potentially a new option internally? Not always possible. I don't know the size of the company or what's viable. And then you do need to consider, if I don't feel like I'm showing up as my best self, if I do feel chronically burnt out, I don't think that staying is in the best interest of for me or the company, then it is time to maybe do an exercise of reflection. What lights me up? When am I my best professionally? If I could write my perfect job description, what would that look like? And start from a place of curiosity. And instead of, oh shoot, I got to go to the job boards and now just start applying, take this moment of, okay, I have clarity, it's not staying. What would next look like? What does ideal look like? And then start to build your plan around how you find it and how you get there. So that was a long answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I think you had some really great prompts in there for deeper thinking. And again, as we've said, this is going to be recorded. So everyone watching at home, you can listen to this back. This will be up in a couple days, and you can kind of jot down a lot of those good prompts that Allison just gave us. We have another question that gets kind of into more physical aspects. What are similarities and differences between burnout and dorsal vagal shutdown? Are you familiar with polyvagal theory? And then there's some kind of discussing DVS, which is dorsal vagal shutdown. Maybe it permanently dysregulates the automatic nervous system, whereas burnout is simply a temporary state and recoverable. I'm not sure if you know anything about that.
This is a good time to mention. I was going to sort of wrap up with I'm a health and wellness coach. I am not a board certified medical provider. And so any health questions, any concerns about how you're feeling, any questions or any curiosities around some of what I presented, this was meant to be exploratory. But if you have any concerns about your health, absolutely follow up with your healthcare provider. I am not qualified to go through very deep distinctions between I don't want to really weigh in on how do I know if it's permanent versus a temporary position or condition. So I would encourage you to follow up with your healthcare provider. And it's really good though to be thinking through the distinctions and how do I know if, and that's something that absolutely I would take to my doctor.
For sure. Thank you. And then, do you think that remote work is leading to more burnout due to lack of personal connections?
Such a great question. We could do a whole session on this. So it's really tough because there are so many benefits to remote work if done well, to provide flexibility, to provide options to working parents who, by cutting out that commute time, you can be home, you can still work and participate full time, but it's not as cumbersome as getting into a city and sitting in traffic. There's so many benefits. There absolutely is an impact to not having that in-person collaboration time. I think the challenge, so if you're a fully remote company and everybody's on the same level playing field, the ways of working inherently are set up for everybody who's remote, the systems and structures, there's sort of equity across everybody operating in that capacity. When you have some people in the office 5 or 4 days a week, and then some people fully remote, it gets really tricky. You have to be super intentional, excuse me, on how you use meeting time. How do we collaborate? How do we have decisions get made such that when people are in the room and there are people who are remote, people who aren't remote aren't left out? Yeah. The question around connection, yes, it is a very real concern. I think particularly in the way that sometimes work doesn't happen in such a prescriptive way, right? It's not, we have these 45 minutes to think about this problem, everyone sign on, go. Sometimes at work, you need that breathing space, you need the hallway conversations. So I am not a proponent of or an advocate for everybody should be remote forever. We should never go back to offices. I think we just need to be super intentional about how we set up work streams, workflows. When we're together, what is the purpose of that time? How do we use that time? When we're in meetings, what does that look like? If there's a hybrid world where some people are dialing in and some people are in person, how are we ensuring that decisions and collaboration is happening in an equitable way? So there's so many, again, we can have a whole session on this. There's a lot to unpack, but I think it's about finding the balance. And if you're a fully remote employee or you work for a fully remote company, it's really important that you find opportunities, from my perspective, for connection. So whether that be local communities, getting involved, volunteering, making time for personal connections outside of work. We are, as a human species, hardwired for connection and community. So it's really important that if you're not getting that during the workday in that remote capacity, that you're looking for that elsewhere.
I think that's a good lead in slash you kind of answered this a little bit at the end there, but someone's asked, how do you deal with loneliness when it seems impossible to find community?
Hmm, such a good question. Such a good question. I think that the first barrier to breakthrough, so let me say this experience, the feelings of loneliness is so personal. It absolutely shows up differently for everybody. So it's really hard to just in a soundbite sort of give advice like where to look, how to find it. It's super personal. It's not easy for everyone. There's a number of layers here, but just to offer a few quick thoughts, I would say get curious on if this is something that I feel like I can't talk to anyone about, how could I maybe start to research and find other people that may be feeling it but don't feel like they can say it publicly? So let me give an example. Burnout. So let's get back to this topic of burnout. When I left my corporate role, I personally felt like I needed to retreat. Those first, that identity crisis shock of, well, who am I if I'm not this executive at this company? This feeling like I personally failed was very tricky to sit with. But I started sharing that, talking to people very slowly after intentional rest, starting to network. And I found that when you share something that's vulnerable or scary or uncomfortable, not only does that create connection with other people, but you also find that actually so many other people are going through it. So I don't know the particulars of the instance of loneliness that you're referring to, but oftentimes if we get curious and we try to just connect one-on-one and share an experience, we'll find that someone feels comfortable then sharing back and then either maybe referring you to a community or offering to bring you to a yoga class with a buddy pet. There's a number of different ways that once you just start opening up to one person, it can lead to more opportunities to find more people that might be going through the same thing. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And then we have another one that I think kind of links back to you mentioned balance earlier. If you have a lot of simultaneous goals, for example, job search, studying for the GRE, journalism school application, and a current job, how do you schedule these things so that you can substantially improve in these different parts of your workload?
Great question. So, a couple of thoughts. There are periods and seasons where we do have a lot of things on our plate, and they're all competing for the precious resource that is our time, but they're also of equal weight. You're not going to say, well, I'm not going to study for this thing. There are times where we can say, what is the single most important thing and sort of deprioritize. But if you've done the exercise to say these 3 to 5 things are very important, and so I need to balance my time to make sure I'm making progress across all of them, then it becomes really important to sit down and understand it's a really big goal. It's studying for an exam. You have to be able to break that down into micro goals and think about the tactics that are going to move you to the outcome you're trying to drive. So if you think about studying for an exam and then all of the other categories, how are you spending your time to get to that outcome such that you feel like when you're sitting down to do the work, you're making progress. Because often, and was very true for me, still is sometimes, we sit with a big goal and it becomes overwhelming. So you've got to break it down. What am I doing to address category one, category two? And actually, if you're a person that likes to calendar it out, block time on your calendar. I'm going to spend these 2 hours on the application. I'm going to spend an hour taking a break, having lunch, stepping away from the screen, whatever that may be, and then context switch into the next big body of work, but get granular in terms of during that time, how am I breaking down and tactically working towards that goal? Like, what am I doing with that time to drive to an outcome? If you're not a calendar person, you can make a list, but it is about breaking down those big categories into smaller goals.
Thank you. That is great advice. And then I think this next question is a good one to end on.
Okay.
What are some best ways to turn off at the end of the day after working, parenting, trying to be social, etc.?
We can get very overstimulated and it is very hard to turn it all off. So again, if very personal, you have to sort of work through and try things and figure out what works for you. So I'll offer a few different things to potentially try. I think first and foremost, to shut down the work brain, it doesn't mean you don't think about work or you don't look at anything for the rest of the day, but that exercise of closing out your day for me is a ritual. It's a way to get it out of my brain, to not be ruminating on potentially things I didn't get to, or, beating myself up that I wasn't as productive as I thought I'd be. Or if I was and I got a bunch done, it gives me that clarity. What am I going to do tomorrow, next week? So that's the first thing, is like shut down the work brain and have some ritual to close out your work day. But then, yes, we go into a whole nother chapter of our day that is evening, potentially if you're a parent, kids, dinner, bedtime routines, activities before all of that. It's a lot. So I think you need to set your, I call it like sleep hygiene routine. And that I think in the wellness space means like, what's my silk pillow look like? And it's actually well before that. It's about the time frame. It's different for everybody, but when do I need to stop watching TV, looking at my phone, and just start to settle my mind? A physical book can be and that's not because this is Carrie Library, a physical book for me, I switched probably 5 or 6 years ago. I had a Kindle forever, but it was just another screen. And so while I do like my Kindle for on the go and travel, I always have a physical book for at night. So whether it's something I'm reading for work, most of the time it's just for pleasure. It does really get me out of any sort of scrolling, any attachment to that blue light, or just staying. Even the TV show, sometimes you can be watching something that's really entertaining, but like your brain is still on. So a physical book, I'll just end on, is a really great way to put all of the devices down and just allow your brain to start to slow down. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Allison. We have a lot of grateful people in the comments. So thank you. You've given
Awesome.
me a lot to think about. I think everyone else feels like you gave us a lot of great prompts and cues. Did you want to
Amazing.
end with anything before we say goodnight?
No, I think again, super grateful. I so appreciate everyone's time, especially on a Wednesday night in January. So yeah, I was thrilled to be here. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to either Alison at getunburnt.com or hello at getunburnt.com, or check out the website. And just again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison, talking with us. Everyone listening at home, I'm gonna have Allison's contact information and the handouts that she's gonna send me in the recording. So if you've registered from Carrie, I'm gonna be sending that to you. If you've registered from other libraries, which I forgot to thank the other libraries that tuned on with us tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and joining us for this talk. And yeah, I will send out an email with the links and everything. And good night, everybody. Thank you so much.